All right, let's jump into this deep dive. You've really piled on the reading material here, huh? All about Robert Hansen, the butcher baker, police interviews, court transcripts, even some books about the case.
Wow, yeah.
Clearly, this case has grabbed you, and I gotta say, it's a fascinating one. But we're gonna go beyond just a summary.
Okay.
We're gonna try to get into, like, the why of it all, you know? How did someone like Hansen manage to, for so long, just fly under the radar in a community that, on the surface at least, thought they knew him?
Well, yeah, that's what's so striking about him, right? You have this seemingly ordinary baker in Anchorage, quiet life, but beneath the surface, this compulsion to stalk and kill. And not just kill, but hunt women in this vast, vast Alaskan wilderness. It's a terrifying duality.
Absolutely terrifying. And our sources really paint a vivid picture of his childhood. Troubled doesn't even begin to describe it. We're talking stuttering, severe acne, bullied relentlessly. Makes you wonder, could these early experiences have been, I don't know, like a breeding ground for the violence that would come later?
It's a question that comes up a lot in criminology. And the truth is, there is a correlation between childhood trauma and criminal behavior. It's certainly not an excuse. But to understand the psychology of a predator like Hansen, you have to go back to that background. The humiliation, the feeling of being an outcast, all that can fester and turn into resentment. And maybe even a desire for revenge against those he saw as, I don't know, different from him.
Like a pressure cooker.
Pressure,
Right.
yeah.
All that anger, all that frustration, building and building until it finally explodes. And it seems for Hansen, the trigger was rejection. In 1971, a woman turns down his advances. He follows her home and tries to abduct her. This is after, like, earlier stuff, petty theft, arson, things like that. This is a serious escalation.
Right, and you're absolutely right to point out the escalation. This is where we start to see his modus operandi, his pattern of behavior emerging, targeting women, using a firearm, seeking secluded locations. All of this, unfortunately, becomes a hallmark of his later crimes.
And the violence, sadly, it just intensifies. Months after that attempted abduction, he grabs a woman from a coffee shop in Anchorage. She goes through this terrifying ordeal, and thankfully, he eventually releases her. The sources describe how he's talking about taking her to a remote cabin, but heavy snow blocked the road. Makes you wonder, was this a practice run? Like, is he refining his strategy?
It's very possible. This incident definitely shows a growing confidence, a chilling premeditation, I'd say. He's not just reacting, he's planning, he's honing his skills as a predator.
And then in 1983, we have the case of Cindy Polson, 18 years old, working as a sex worker in Anchorage. This incident becomes a turning point, I think, both in terms of understanding Hansen and understanding how he was able to manipulate the system for so long. Can you tell us a bit about Cindy's experience?
Yeah, her ordeal it's absolutely harrowing. Hansen ducks her, takes her back to his house, leads her down to the basement, and our sources describe this basement filled with hunting trophies, taxidermied animals. And when you think about what we know now, it takes on a whole new, disturbing meaning. He chains her up, assaults her, and warns her, "Don't wake me up."
Mm.
It's a level of control, a display of power that is just chilling.
Just horrifying to even think about, being trapped in that basement. But despite that fear, Cindy managed to escape. While Hansen was sleeping, she starts planning, waiting for the right opportunity. He eventually takes her to Merrifield Airport, the plan being to fly her out to his cabin, the secluded cabin he had. But as soon as he steps away from the car, Cindy makes a run for it. Barefoot, still handcuffed, she runs across the airfield.
Incredibly brave. There's a truck driver who spotted her and intervened. Just a simple act of kindness, really, that ends up being so crucial in bringing Hansen down eventually.
But it wasn't straightforward, was it? The police initially dismiss her claims. And a lot of that comes down to the biases against sex workers at the time. It's a reminder of how vulnerability can be so easily exploited and how those systemic prejudices can really hinder justice.
And Hansen knew that, right? He was cunning. He targeted women he thought would be less likely to be believed, less likely to have their disappearances thoroughly investigated. He played the part of the unassuming baker. He even made friends with local police officers. He was a master manipulator, hiding in plain sight.
Hiding in plain sight, exactly. But thankfully, not everyone was fooled. Officer Greg Baker, the one who took Cindy's report, he refused to just dismiss her story. He saw past the surface. He recognized a pattern in Hansen's behavior, linking this incident to past reports of violence against women.
Officer Baker's persistence is remarkable. He really dug into Hansen's past, going back to those earlier cases that were ignored or downplayed. He saw the escalation, the growing danger that others had missed.
His instincts were spot on. He just knew there was more to Hansen than met the eye. And he started building a case. driven by his belief in Cindy and his determination to uncover the truth.
And that dedication pays off. During a search of Hansen's home, they find this chilling piece of evidence, an aeronautical chart with 21 X's marking locations across Alaska.
A roadmap to his crimes. Chilling to think about the meticulous planning, the vastness of his hunting ground.
And tragically, several of those markings lined up with the locations where the bodies of missing women had already been found. It was the smoking gun they needed. It really is. You look at that map, those meticulously marked X's, and it's like a window into his psyche. It wasn't just a record of his crimes. It was almost like some twisted trophy, a visual representation of his control.
It's bone-chilling, absolutely. And it wasn't just the map, right? The investigators found jewelry, clothing, personal belongings of his victims, all hidden away in his attic. How do you live a quote-unquote normal life surrounded by those grim reminders? I mean, talk about compartmentalization.
Well, compartmentalization, it is a psychological coping mechanism, and
Right.
we do see it a lot in individuals who commit these horrific acts. It lets them separate their criminal behavior from their everyday lives. It's like this mental barrier. It allows them to function in society, hold down a job, have relationships, all while concealing this incredibly dark side.
Yeah.
And it's not about forgetting or denying what they've done. It's more about, I think, mentally distancing themselves from the emotional and moral consequences, like having separate files in a cabinet, one for the normal life, one for the dark deeds.
That's a disturbing thought, but it does help explain how someone like Hansen could keep up this facade for so long, but eventually that facade crumbled. Our sources describe a pretty dramatic interrogation scene. Investigators confront Hansen with all the evidence, the map, the victim's belongings.
Yeah, it was a carefully planned psychological battle. They used those visual cues to break through his denials. Imagine being confronted with a map, literally pinpointing the burial sites of your victims. That visual representation, it's a powerful tactic designed to overwhelm a suspect's defenses, force them to confront the reality of what they've done.
And it worked. Hansen confesses to the murders of 4 women: Eklutna Annie, Joanna Messina, Sherry Morrow, and Paula Goulding. He describes luring them, abducting them, and then hunting them down in the wilderness like it's some sort of twisted game.
The confessions are chilling. You see this pattern of escalating violence, this deep-seated hatred toward the women he targeted. He dehumanizes them, reduces them to objects in this twisted fantasy he's created. And it's not just about power and control. It's also about this warped sense of entitlement. Like he had the right to decide who lived and who died.
It's just sickening. But remember those 21 X's on Hansen's map? After his confession, he agrees to lead the police to the burial sites of his other victims. A gruesome task, but crucial in, providing some closure for the families of those missing women.
Imagine the impact of those discoveries. Not just on the families, but on the entire Anchorage community. This wasn't just a crime story. It was a revelation. And a terrifying one. It shattered their sense of safety, their sense of security.
The butcher baker, as the media called him, became this symbol of fear, a reminder that evil could lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary lives. And as the snow melted, the police, guided by Hansen's map, unearthed the remains of 11 women, scattered across the Alaskan wilderness.
The scale of it was staggering, and the impact on the victims' families devastating. Losing a loved one is a tragedy, but to learn they were brutally murdered, discarded like prey, that's a wound that might never fully heal.
You've touched on the emotional impact, but what about the legal proceedings? How did the justice system respond to such horrific crimes?
Well, in exchange for his cooperation, for leading them to those burial sites, Hansen was spared the death penalty. He was sentenced to 461 years in prison without the possibility of parole. So effectively a life sentence.
461 years. It's a staggering number, but does it truly reflect the magnitude of his crimes? I mean, does any sentence really bring justice in a case like this? It's a question that, it lingers long after the gavel falls.
Justice is a complex concept, that's for sure. And in cases like this, it often feels elusive. A lengthy sentence might provide some sense of retribution, but it can never truly erase the pain and suffering he inflicted. On the victims, on their families, the scars run deep. They impact not just individuals, but the entire community.
His case, it really is a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist, even in seemingly ordinary individuals. And the consequences of unchecked violence, they're devastating. It's a chilling thought, but a crucial one to confront. It's heavy stuff, no doubt. And even though Hansen died in prison back in 2014, this case, it still has this hold on people, the horror, the fascination. But even with his conviction, there are still so many unanswered questions. like those 6 victims who remain unaccounted for.
Yeah, that's right. While those 11 women being found brought a sense of closure to some families, for others, it's still this agonizing question mark. What happened to their loved ones? Like, for instance, Hansen confessed to murdering Andrea Altieri and Roxane Eastland, but the remains have never been located. It's heartbreaking, that lack of a final resting place, the inability to truly grieve.
And then there are those 4 extra markings on his map, the ones he just refused to discuss. One of them in particular is really intriguing. It aligns with the location where Celia Beth Van Zanten was found frozen to death back in 1971.
Right, right. Her case was never officially solved, but the circumstances are, well, they're eerily similar to Hansen's known crimes. She was found stripped, bound, gagged. Evidence strongly suggests she was sexually assaulted. And given the proximity of that marking on his map and his history of violence against women during that same time period, it's hard not to see a potential connection.
It's like having a puzzle piece that almost fits, but you can't quite get it to snap in. And it's got to be incredibly frustrating, especially for Celia's family. They deserve answers.
Absolutely. And then the mystery deepens. You have those 2 markings on the map, both near Resurrection Bay and Seward. One of them is thought to maybe be the burial site of Megan Emmerich, who vanished from Seward back in 1973. She was just 17. The other marking is potentially connected to the disappearance of Mary Phil in 1975.
And what's striking is Hansen admitted to being in Seward on both of those days, but he vehemently denied any involvement in either case.
Exactly. And without his cooperation, without a confession, without any physical evidence directly linking him, those cases, they remain open, shrouded in uncertainty.
It's just tragic. A reminder that even with a confession, even with a conviction, some cases are never truly closed. Those families are left in this state of limbo, forever wondering.
And I think that speaks to the lasting impact of a case like this. It's not just about the immediate victims. It erodes trust. It creates this sense of vulnerability, and it leaves a community struggling to grapple with the fact that this kind of darkness can exist right in their midst.
So after spending all this time with this case, what stands out to you the most? What are the key takeaways for us, for our listener? What should we remember about Robert Hansen?
Well, for me, it's a reminder, a stark reminder about listening to and believing survivors. Cindy Paulson, her bravery in escaping and recording what happened to her, it was crucial. Yet she was met with skepticism, with disbelief, and that happens far too often. We need to challenge those biases, those prejudices that prevent victims from coming forward and getting the justice they deserve.
It also shows the importance of people like Officer Baker, those law enforcement officers who are willing to dig deeper, connect those dots, relentlessly pursue the truth, even when it means pushing back, even when it means facing resistance.
And I think, maybe most importantly, it's a reminder that behind the headlines, behind the almost sensationalized accounts, these were real people. Their lives were cut short. These weren't just names on a map. These were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. They were loved, and they are missed. Their stories deserve to be remembered.
We've learned a lot about Robert Hansen in this deep dive, but as we've said, there's still so much we don't know, so many unanswered questions, so many threads left hanging. We encourage you, our listener, to keep exploring this case. Go back to those sources, see what resonates with you, what motivated Hansen. Were there other factors that maybe we didn't uncover?
That's the beauty of knowledge, isn't it? The more we understand these predators, the better chance we have of preventing these tragedies in the future. It's about advocating for a safer world.
Thank you for joining us on this chilling but important journey into the mind of the Butcher Baker.